I've been a critical care nurse for nearly a decade, and I've always prided myself on being attentive, both at work and at home. My wife, Emily, and I have been married for 12 years. We have 2 kids, Jake and Olivia, and I thought we had a solid relationship. Sure, we had our ups and downs, like any couple, but I never doubted her love or loyalty. But over the past 6 months, something started to feel off. It's hard to explain, but Emily just wasn't the same. She used to text me little things during the day, a funny meme, a random, "I miss you," or updates about the kids. But that all started tapering off. When I'd ask how her day was, her answers became vague, like she was deliberately holding back. Then there were the nights out. Emily started going to more girls' nights than usual. At first, I didn't think much of it, she deserved to unwind. But then it got excessive. Twice a week turned into 3, then 4. She'd come home late, sometimes smelling like a mix of perfume and someone else's cologne. The final straw, though, was her phone. Emily was always glued to it, smiling at texts she didn't share with me, flipping her screen down whenever I got close. I didn't want to be that guy who snooped, but I could feel a knot forming in my gut. One night, I jokingly asked her if she had a secret admirer. She laughed it off, but the way her face froze for a fraction of a second, it stuck with me. That was when the suspicion started to creep in, subtle at first, but eventually consuming every quiet moment I had. I brushed it off as paranoia. I mean, I had no proof, right? And Emily would never cheat on me. At least, that's what I told myself over and over. But I was wrong. It happened on a Friday night, a night like any other, or so I thought. I had just finished a grueling 12-hour shift at the hospital, came home, and collapsed onto the couch, completely drained. Emily wasn't home, of course. She had told me earlier in the day she'd be out with her friends again. At this point, I wasn't even bothering to ask which friends. Every time I did, it felt like her answers were rehearsed. Always the same names, always the same stories. I was scrolling through my phone, trying to decompress, when an email notification popped up. The subject line read, "You deserve to know the truth." At first, I thought it was spam. I was about to delete it, but something told me to open it. Call it instinct, call it morbid curiosity, I'll never know. The email had no text, just a video file attached. My heart sank as I downloaded it. The room was spinning, my palms sweaty, my breathing shallow. I knew what it was before I even hit play, but I wasn't ready for what I saw. The video was shaky, like it had been recorded in secret, but the quality was clear enough. It showed Emily, my Emily, sitting at a dimly lit restaurant. She was with another man, and not just any man. It was Brandon, my brother-in-law. My sister Lisa's husband. I stared at the screen, unable to look away as the scene unfolded. Emily was leaning across the table, her hand resting on Brandon's forearm in a way that made my stomach churn. They were laughing, sharing some private joke, their faces way too close for comfort. Then it happened. He reached out, tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear, and kissed her. My stomach flipped, bile rising in my throat. I paused the video, rewound it, and watched it again, hoping I'd somehow misinterpreted what I saw. But there was no denying it. My wife was kissing another man, and that man was part of my family. For a while, I just sat there in silence, the video playing on a loop in my mind. I couldn't process it. It didn't feel real. How could she do this? How could he do this? Brandon and I weren't particularly close, but we saw each other at every family gathering. He'd sit at my table, drink my beer, play with my kids. And all this time, he was sneaking around with my wife. After the initial shock wore off, anger started bubbling up. Who sent me this? Why now? Why not sooner? I checked the email address, but it was anonymous, some random string of numbers and letters. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as fake, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I couldn't just sit there. My hands shaking, I grabbed my phone and texted Emily. Hey, when are you coming home? Emily, not too late. Why? Just asking. Emily, don't wait up. Love you. The audacity of her last message made me want to throw my phone across the room. Love you? How could she type those words while sitting across from Brandon, probably planning their next secret meeting? I didn't reply. Instead, I went back to the email and rewatched the video, scanning for details. The restaurant looked familiar, a place not far from our neighborhood. I even recognized the waiter in the background. It was a spot Emily and I had gone to for date nights before life got so hectic. The irony wasn't lost on me. The anger kept building, but beneath it was a deep, aching sadness. I thought about our kids, Jake and Olivia, how they idolized their mom. How could I tell them? Should I? And Lisa, what about her? She had no idea her husband was out betraying her, too. My head was spinning with questions, but one thing was clear, this wasn't something I could ignore. I didn't know how I'd confront her yet, but I knew it was coming. She had no idea her perfect little secret was about to come crashing down. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat on the couch, staring at the dark screen of my phone, waiting for her to come home. Every minute felt like an hour, the tension in my chest building with every tick of the clock. When I finally heard her key in the door, my heart stopped. I wasn't ready, but there was no turning back. Emily walked in just after midnight, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She looked surprised to see me sitting on the couch, my arms crossed, and my phone gripped tightly in my hand. "Oh, you're still up," she said casually, shrugging off her coat and tossing her purse onto the chair by the door. She didn't even look at me as she kicked off her shoes. I stared at her, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah. I couldn't sleep." She finally turned to me, her face softening into what I could only describe as guilt masked with concern. "Long shift?" I didn't answer. My jaw clenched, and I gestured to the couch. "Sit." Her brow furrowed. "What's wrong?" "Sit," I repeated, my tone sharper this time. Emily hesitated but eventually sat down across from me, her posture stiff. I could tell she was starting to feel uneasy, but she still didn't know what was coming. "I got an email tonight," I said, staring directly at her. "With a video." Her face paled, and her eyes widened just slightly before she caught herself and tried to play it cool. "What kind of video?" she asked, her voice tight. I took a deep breath, my hands shaking as I pulled up the video on my phone. I turned the screen toward her and hit play. Her reaction was immediate. She gasped and looked away, her hand flying to her mouth. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. "That's what you're worried about?" "Where I got it?" I spat, my voice rising. "You're kissing Brandon in a goddamn restaurant, and all you care about is how I found out." Emily's face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might start crying. But instead of apologizing, she tried to defend herself. "It's not what it looks like," she said quickly, her words tumbling over each other. "Not what it looks like?" I repeated, incredulous. "You're literally kissing my sister's husband. What the hell else could it be?" She stood up, pacing the room, running her hands through her hair. I wasn't thinking. It was a mistake, okay? A stupid, one-time mistake." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "One time? Don't lie to me, Emily. You've been disappearing for months. You're constantly on your phone, acting secretive, going out more nights than you're home. Don't insult me by saying this was a one-time thing." She stopped pacing and turned to me, her face desperate. "It didn't mean anything, I swear. I was just lonely. You're always at work, and I felt like we were drifting apart. I didn't know how to talk to you." Her excuses hit me like a slap to the face. So your solution was to screw around with Brandon? My brother-in-law? Do you even hear yourself right now? I didn't plan for this to happen, she said, tears streaming down her face now. It just happened. I stood up, towering over her, my anger boiling over. Things like this don't just happen, Emily. You made a choice to betray me, to betray our kids, to betray Lisa. Do you even care about what this is going to do to them? At the mention of the kids, she broke down completely, sinking to the floor in a heap. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. But her tears didn't move me. Not this time. I had spent years being the one to fix things, to smooth things over, to be the rock in our marriage. But this? This was too far. I sat back down, running my hands through my hair, my mind racing. Do Lisa and the kids know? Emily shook her head vehemently. No. God, no. They don't know anything. Please, can we keep this between us? I'll end it, I promise. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Her words hung in the air, but they felt hollow. I couldn't trust her anymore, not after this. The damage was already done. I don't know, Emily, I said finally, my voice quieter now but no less firm. I don't know if there's anything left to fix. She sobbed harder, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Instead, I stood up and walked out of the room, leaving her there on the floor. I needed space, time to think about what the hell I was going to do next. As I climbed the stairs to the guest room, one thought kept running through my mind: how do you come back from this? I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the bed in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the confrontation in my head. Her excuses, her tears, the way she had the nerve to ask me to keep it a secret, it all felt like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. I thought about the kids. Jake and Olivia were my world, and the idea of breaking their family apart made my chest feel like it was caving in. But what choice did I have? Staying in this marriage, pretending everything was fine, would be a lie. And if there was one thing I couldn't stand, it was dishonesty, especially from the person I'd trusted most. The next morning, Emily tried to talk to me. She knocked on the guest room door softly, her voice trembling. Can we talk, please? She asked. I didn't answer at first. I wasn't ready to face her again, but I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. So, with a deep breath, I opened the door. She looked like a wreck, her eyes puffy from crying, her hair unbrushed, her face pale. I made coffee, she said quietly, holding 2 mugs. I don't want coffee, I replied flatly, stepping past her and heading downstairs. She followed me, setting the mugs on the kitchen counter. I know you're angry. I know I messed up. But we need to figure out what to do next, for the kids, if nothing else. Her mention of the kids felt like manipulation, like she was trying to guilt me into staying calm. And while I knew she was right, we did need to think about Jake and Olivia. I wasn't ready to let her off the hook so easily. What do you suggest, Emily? I asked, turning to face her. That we pretend nothing happened? That we play happy family while you sneak around with Brandon? Her face crumpled. No. I told you, I'll end it. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Therapy, counseling, whatever you want. I laughed bitterly. Make this right? You don't just make right something like this. You destroyed our marriage, Emily. You destroyed me. Her eyes filled with tears again, but I didn't care. I couldn't let her tears sway me. I need time, I said finally. Time to figure out what I want to do, what's best for me and the kids. But don't expect me to just forgive you, because I can't. Not right now. She nodded, wiping her eyes. Take all the time you need. I'll give you space. Just, please don't tell Lisa yet. Let me talk to her first. Her request hit a nerve. Lisa was my sister, my blood. The idea of keeping this from her felt like another betrayal, but at the same time, I didn't want to act impulsively. I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet, I said firmly. But don't think for a second that I'll keep this secret forever. She deserves to know. Emily nodded again, her lips trembling. I understand. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, needing to clear my head. I drove aimlessly for hours, my thoughts spinning in 1,000 different directions. Should I stay and try to work things out for the kids? Or should I leave and start over, even if it meant breaking their hearts? The weight of the decision was suffocating, but one thing was clear: no matter what I chose, life as I knew it would never be the same. After hours of driving with no real destination, I ended up parked outside my sister Lisa's house. It wasn't intentional, my mind just seemed to guide me there. Her house was quiet, the porch light glowing softly in the evening dusk. I sat there for a long time, staring at the windows, wondering if I should go in. Lisa and I had always been close. She was the one I'd called after Mom passed, the one who helped me navigate the chaos of parenthood when Jake was born. She was more than my sister, she was my confidant. And now her husband had betrayed her in the worst way possible. I wanted to protect her, but how? Would telling her shatter her world beyond repair? Or would it give her the truth she deserved? My thoughts were interrupted when the front door opened, and there she was, stepping onto the porch with a laundry basket in her arms. Matt, she called, squinting into the driveway. I rolled down the window. Hey. She smiled and set the basket down, walking over to the car. What are you doing here? Everything okay? I hesitated, forcing a smile that I knew didn't reach my eyes. Yeah, I just needed to talk. Her smile faded as she studied my face. Come inside. You look like you've been through hell. I followed her into the house, the familiar scent of vanilla candles and freshly baked cookies wrapping around me like a hug. Lisa was the kind of person who made everyone feel at home, and for a moment, I wished I could freeze time, stay in this bubble of normalcy forever. But reality hit me like a freight train when Brandon walked into the kitchen. Matt, he said, grinning as he clapped me on the shoulder. What brings you by? I stiffened under his touch, my fists clenching at my sides. It took everything in me not to knock him out right then and there. How could he act so casual, so friendly, when I knew what he'd been doing behind Lisa's back? Just needed to talk to Lisa, I said, my voice tight. He nodded, oblivious to the rage simmering beneath my surface. Well, I'll leave you two to it. I'm heading to the store. Need anything, babe? Lisa shook her head, giving him a quick kiss on the cheek before he grabbed his keys and walked out the door. I stared at the floor, my jaw clenched so hard it hurt. When he was gone, Lisa turned to me, concern etched on her face. Matt, seriously, what's going on? You're scaring me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. Lisa. I need to tell you something, and it's not going to be easy to hear. Her expression shifted, her brow furrowing as she leaned against the counter. What is it? I hesitated, my throat tightening. It's about Brandon. And Emily. Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. What about them? I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the video. My hands trembled as I held it out to her. You need to see this. Lisa took the phone, her hand steady as she hit play. I watched her face as the video played, the color draining from her cheeks, her eyes growing wider with every passing second. By the time it ended, she was shaking, her hand covering her mouth. Oh my God, she whispered, her voice breaking. Oh my God. Lisa, I'm so sorry, I said, my voice cracking. I didn't want you to find out like this, but you needed to know. She stared at the screen for a moment longer before setting the phone down on the counter. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but her expression was one of pure rage. "How long?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I admitted. "But it's been going on for a while. I found out last night." She let out a bitter laugh, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I can't believe this. That bastard." "And Emily," her voice trailed off, and she shook her head, as if trying to wake herself from a nightmare. "I'm so sorry," I repeated, my heart breaking for her. She straightened, her tears drying as quickly as they had come. "No," she said firmly, her voice steely. "You have nothing to apologize for. They did this, not you." Her resilience amazed me, but I could see the pain lurking behind her eyes. "What are you going to do?" I asked softly. She took a deep breath, her jaw tightening. "First, I'm kicking Brandon out. Then, I'm going to make damn sure neither of them gets away with this." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of hope. Lisa wasn't going to let this betrayal destroy her, and neither was I. Together, we would figure out how to pick up the pieces. Lisa didn't waste any time. Within an hour of Brandon walking back through the door, she confronted him. I stayed in the background, giving her the space to handle it how she needed to, but I could hear every word through the thin walls of the kitchen. "I know, Brandon," she said flatly. Her tone wasn't loud, but it was cutting, the kind that immediately makes someone freeze. "Know what?" Brandon's voice wavered slightly, his confusion laced with an edge of fear. Lisa didn't even flinch. "Don't play dumb. I know about you and Emily. I've seen the video. It's over." There was a beat of silence, and then Brandon stammered, "Lisa, it's not what it looks like. Stop." Her voice cracked like a whip. "I don't want your excuses, your lies, or whatever pathetic story you're about to spin. You betrayed me. You betrayed us." I stayed in the living room, hearing things escalate. I could tell she was holding her ground, and Brandon's attempts to talk his way out of it weren't working. I had no sympathy for him. When he finally stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him, Lisa walked back into the living room. Her eyes were red, but her expression was stone cold. "Well, that's done," she said, crossing her arms. I nodded, unsure of what to say. "You okay?" She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "Not even a little. But I will be." We sat down together at her kitchen table, a pot of untouched coffee growing cold between us. For the first time, we allowed ourselves to process what had just happened. The weight of the betrayal hung heavy in the air, but so did something else, a determination to take back control. "We need to be smart about this," Lisa said finally, her voice steady. "If they think they're going to walk away from this unscathed, they've got another thing coming." I nodded. "Agreed. But how do we go about it? I don't want to do anything that could hurt Jake and Olivia. They don't know yet, and I'd like to keep it that way for now." Lisa's face softened at the mention of my kids. "Of course. We'll protect them, no matter what. But that doesn't mean we let Emily and Brandon get away with this." We started to brainstorm, talking late into the night. It wasn't just about getting justice, it was about making sure our families, our kids, didn't suffer because of their selfishness. Lisa had already decided she was going to file for divorce. "There's no coming back from this," she said. And honestly, I'm relieved. I've been carrying this marriage for years while Brandon's been out doing God knows what. This just gave me the push I needed. For me, the decision wasn't so clear. Emily and I had a prenup, which was good, it would limit how much she could take if we divorced. But the idea of splitting up my family felt like an open wound I wasn't ready to press on yet. "I'm going to talk to a lawyer," I said finally. "I need to know my options before I decide anything. But one thing's for sure, I'm not letting her walk all over me. Not after this." Lisa nodded. "Good. And don't let her guilt you into staying if you know it's not right. She made her bed. Now she can lie in it. We also agreed to start gathering evidence, texts, emails, financial records, anything that could support our cases if things got ugly. Lisa already had the video, and I suspected there might be more out there. This is going to get messy, I said, running a hand through my hair. It already is, Lisa replied with a small, sad smile. But we'll get through it. Together. For the first time in days, I felt a small glimmer of hope. I wasn't alone in this. Lisa and I had each other's backs, and together, we'd figure out how to rebuild our lives from the wreckage Emily and Brandon had left behind. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My head pounded, my body ached, and the weight of everything was still pressing down on me. But there was no time to wallow. Lisa and I had a plan, and it was time to put it into action. The first thing I did was call a lawyer. I wasn't ready to file for divorce yet, but I needed to know my options. I found a family law attorney who came highly recommended and scheduled an appointment for later in the week. In the meantime, Lisa and I decided to start gathering as much evidence as we could. Emily had always been meticulous about her phone. She was one of those people who locked it with both a passcode and fingerprint, and I hadn't had the opportunity, or the courage, to try snooping through it before. But I had a hunch that her phone was a goldmine of information. That evening, while Emily was in the shower, I took a calculated risk. Her phone was charging on the nightstand, and she'd left it unlocked, a rare occurrence. My hands shook as I picked it up and started scrolling through her messages. I didn't even have to dig deep. Right there, at the top of her conversation list, was Brandon's name. I opened the thread and immediately regretted it. The messages were explicit, filled with details I didn't want to know. They talked about when and where they'd meet, how much they missed each other, and even made snide comments about me and Lisa. Every word was like a dagger to the heart, but I kept scrolling, screenshotting everything. I needed proof. Then I found something even worse, photos. Selfies of the two of them together, taken in the apartment where they'd been meeting. Pictures of Emily in lingerie, ones I'd never seen before. And worse, there were financial exchanges. Brandon had sent her money through payment apps, and Emily had sent him expensive gifts. It was all there, in black and white. By the time Emily got out of the shower, I was back downstairs, my head spinning. I transferred everything I found to a secure folder on my laptop and backed it up to the cloud. I felt sick, but I knew this was necessary. Lisa, meanwhile, had been doing her own digging. She found suspicious charges on their joint credit card, hotel stays, fancy dinners, even a charge for lingerie at a boutique Emily had recommended to her just months ago. The audacity of it all was staggering. When we met up that evening, we laid everything out on the table. Between the two of us, we now had enough evidence to confirm what we already knew, and then some. But it wasn't just about the affair anymore. The financial misconduct made things even more complicated. Emily and Brandon had been siphoning money from both households to fund their little rendezvous. Lisa was livid. "I can't believe he used our money for this," she fumed. "It's bad enough he cheated, but stealing from our family? That's a whole new level of disgusting." "I know," I said, my jaw clenched. "And they thought they'd get away with it." Lisa nodded, her eyes steely. "Not a chance. We're going to make sure they face the consequences for everything they've done." We decided to sit on the evidence for now, letting the lawyers guide us on how best to use it. But I couldn't help feeling like there was more out there, waiting to be uncovered. The phone and financial records were damning, but I had a feeling there were still secrets they hadn't managed to hide. By the end of the night, Lisa and I made a pact. No matter how messy things got, no matter how painful, we'd stick together. We were determined to protect our kids, our assets, and ourselves from the fallout. Emily and Brandon had underestimated us, but they were about to find out just how far we were willing to go to take back control of our lives. I thought I was doing a decent job of holding it together for the kids, but Jake and Olivia are smarter than I gave them credit for. Kids pick up on things: tension in the house, quiet arguments behind closed doors, the absence of warmth in a home that used to feel unbreakable. It was late one night when Jake, my 15-year-old, knocked on my bedroom door. I was sitting at my desk, reviewing the folder of evidence I'd collected. I quickly closed my laptop and called him in. "Hey, bud, what's up?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He walked in hesitantly, glancing around the room like he was trying to decide whether or not to say what was on his mind. "Dad, is everything okay?" I froze, my heart sinking. "What do you mean?" He shifted uncomfortably, running a hand through his messy hair. "I mean, you and Mom. You guys aren't, like, fighting or something, are you?" Jake was always a perceptive kid, but I wasn't prepared for this conversation. I took a deep breath, trying to figure out how much to tell him without completely shattering his world. "Why do you ask?" I said carefully. He hesitated before sitting on the edge of my bed. "I don't know. It's just, you've been sleeping in the guest room, and Mom's been weird lately. She's always out, and when she's home, she's either on her phone or acting like nothing's wrong. It just doesn't feel normal." The knot in my stomach tightened. "Jake, sometimes adults go through tough things. But I promise, no matter what happens, your Mom and I both love you and Olivia more than anything." He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said something that completely blindsided me. "Is Mom cheating on you?" I stared at him, speechless. My first instinct was to deny it, to protect him from the ugly truth. But Jake wasn't a little kid anymore. He deserved honesty, at least, as much as I could give him without dragging him into the mess. "Why would you think that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He shrugged, looking down at his hands. "I don't know. She's been acting weird for months. And one time, I saw a notification on her phone when she wasn't looking. It was a message from Uncle Brandon." He paused, his face twisting in confusion. It said something like, "Can't wait to see you later." It felt wrong. I felt my blood run cold. Jake had seen more than I realized, and he'd been holding on to it, trying to make sense of it on his own. I didn't want to believe it, he continued, his voice cracking. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I mean, she's always going out, and Uncle Brandon's been acting weird, too. Am I crazy, Dad? I reached out, putting a hand on his shoulder. You're not crazy, Jake. And I'm sorry you've had to carry this by yourself. But I need you to trust me when I say I'm doing everything I can to figure this out and make it right. Okay? He nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. Okay. Before he left the room, he stopped in the doorway and looked back at me. Dad, if there's anything I can do to help, just tell me. His words stayed with me long after he went to bed. Jake wasn't just my son, he was stepping up in a way I never expected, trying to protect his family in the only way he knew how. A few days later, Jake came to me again, this time with Olivia, who was 12 and just as sharp as her brother. Together, they told me they'd been tracking Emily's location through a phone locator app she'd forgotten they had access to. She keeps going to this one apartment, Jake said, showing me the app on his phone. We looked it up. It's not anywhere she's mentioned before. It's weird, Dad. I felt a mix of pride and heartbreak as I listened to them. They had figured out more than I thought, and as much as I hated the idea of them being involved, I couldn't deny the evidence they were presenting. Look, Jake said hesitantly. We know you're trying to protect us, but we can handle this. We just want to help. I didn't know what to say. On one hand, I wanted to shield them from every ounce of this pain. On the other hand, they were already in it, whether I liked it or not. Okay, I said finally. But let me handle most of it, all right? You're kids, you shouldn't have to deal with this. They both nodded, but I could see the determination in their eyes. They were going to do whatever it took to help, no matter what I said. That night, I realized the betrayal had reached further than I ever imagined. Emily and Brandon hadn't just hurt Lisa and me, they had hurt our children, too. And that was something I couldn't forgive. Jake and Olivia's discovery of the apartment opened a new door in the investigation, one I hadn't anticipated. As much as I wanted to protect them from further involvement, I realized their instincts had been spot on. They had access to things I didn't, and their curiosity was a powerful force. I had to tread carefully, balancing their involvement while shielding them from the full weight of this betrayal. The apartment they'd tracked Emily to wasn't far, about 15 minutes from our house. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the idea of Emily renting a secret space without my knowledge was suspicious enough. It didn't take long to connect the dots, this was where she and Brandon were meeting. Jake was the one who suggested installing hidden cameras in the apartment. At first, I balked at the idea. It felt invasive, extreme, and wrong to involve the kids in something like this. But when he showed me how easy it would be to do it remotely, I reluctantly agreed. He explained that he'd found a way to discreetly drop off a tiny, wireless camera by disguising it in an everyday object, a phone charger. "I've been watching videos online," Jake said, his voice steady, though his hands trembled slightly. "We can do this without anyone noticing." Olivia chimed in, her voice quieter but just as determined. "We just want to help, Dad. We can't sit around and pretend this isn't happening." I looked at both of them, my heart breaking. How did we get here? My children, who should have been worrying about homework and soccer games, were planning covert surveillance operations. But the reality was clear, we were in this together, and their determination to protect our family gave me the strength to move forward. The next step was figuring out how to gain access to the apartment. Jake had discovered through the locator app that Emily usually went there during the afternoons, while I was at work. She was consistent, always arriving around 1 p.m. and leaving by 4 p.m. That gave us a window to act. I decided to take a day off work, telling Emily I needed some time to decompress. She didn't question it, she was too preoccupied with whatever excuses she was feeding Brandon. Once she left for her errands, Jake and I drove to the apartment complex. Jake had the hidden camera tucked in his jacket, and I carried a toolbox to make it look like we were there for maintenance. We'd learned from his research that many apartments in the complex used keypad entry systems. If Emily had left the code somewhere accessible, on her phone, in her texts, it would be a matter of trial and error. Jake found the code faster than I expected. He'd remembered seeing a string of numbers in one of Emily's text exchanges with Brandon, labeled as "spare key for apartment." It worked on the second try. My hands shook as I opened the door, the weight of what we were doing pressing down on me. The apartment was sparsely decorated, but it was clear it wasn't just a random rental. There were personal touches, photos of Emily and Brandon on a desk, a bottle of her favorite perfume on the dresser. The betrayal hit me anew, like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a fling, they'd built a secret life here. We worked quickly. Jake set up the hidden camera in the living room, tucking it into an outlet near the TV. I checked drawers, cabinets, and closets, documenting everything I found. There were receipts for dinners, hotel stays, and gifts. In the bathroom, I found a second toothbrush, a bottle of Brandon's cologne, and Emily's makeup bag. Every discovery felt like another knife twisting in my back. Before leaving, I placed everything back exactly as it was. The last thing I wanted was for them to suspect anything. As we locked up and left the apartment, Jake looked up at me. "Did we do the right thing, Dad?" I put a hand on his shoulder, trying to hide the turmoil I felt inside. "We did what we had to do, Jake. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about protecting our family." That night, we reviewed the footage from the camera. It didn't take long for it to confirm what we already knew. Emily and Brandon were there together, laughing, kissing, acting as if they didn't have a care in the world. Watching it was like ripping open a wound that had barely begun to scab over. The evidence was damning, but it wasn't just about proving the affair anymore. It was about ensuring that neither Emily nor Brandon could manipulate the narrative when everything came to light. The more we uncovered, the clearer it became that they weren't just betraying us emotionally, they were playing games with our trust, our finances, and our lives. Lisa and I agreed to meet the next day to review everything we'd found. She had started looking into Brandon's financial records, discovering that he'd been moving money around without her knowledge. Between the two of us, we were building an airtight case against them, but it came at a cost. The more we dug, the more painful it became to confront just how deep their betrayal ran. As I sat with Jake and Olivia that night, I felt a strange mix of pride and heartbreak. They were too young to be dealing with something this heavy, but their resilience was undeniable. They'd shown me that our family, fractured as it was, still had strength left. And that strength would carry us through whatever came next. The next day, Lisa and I met at her house to share everything we'd uncovered. She had been busy too. Armed with her access to Brandon's financial accounts, she had discovered several questionable transactions. The man wasn't just siphoning money from their joint accounts to fund his affair with Emily, he'd also opened a credit card without her knowledge. The charges on that card painted a damning picture: dinners at upscale restaurants, jewelry purchases, and even the down payment for the apartment where he and Emily had been meeting. When I showed her the video footage Jake and I had captured, Lisa sat in stunned silence, her hands gripping the edge of the table. The video wasn't just evidence of infidelity, it was proof of the double life Brandon and Emily had been leading right under our noses. Lisa finally broke the silence. "They really thought they could get away with this, didn't they?" she said, her voice trembling with both anger and disbelief. I nodded. "They didn't just betray us. They were reckless. Brandon's using your money, Emily's using mine, and they've somehow convinced themselves this is sustainable." Lisa shook her head, her jaw tight. "Not anymore. They're not going to walk away from this unscathed. We spent hours organizing the evidence into folders." Lisa's lawyer had already started preparing her divorce case, and now, with this new information, the plan was to ensure Brandon left with as little as possible. My lawyer had advised me to do the same, focusing on the prenuptial agreement Emily had signed before our marriage. Infidelity would limit her to a small fraction of our assets, something I knew she wasn't expecting. As we worked, Lisa paused, staring at one of the receipts from the apartment. "Do you ever wonder how long this has been going on?" she asked softly. I hesitated, unsure how to answer. "Yeah," I admitted. "I think about it all the time. But I don't know if it matters anymore. It happened, and that's what matters now." She nodded, but her eyes were filled with pain. "I just feel like such an idiot. All the times he told me he was working late or going out with friends, and I believed him." "You're not an idiot," I said firmly. "They're the ones who lied. They're the ones who betrayed us. This isn't on you, Lisa." She managed a small, bitter smile. "Thanks. But it still feels like I should have seen it sooner." I didn't have an answer for that. I'd been asking myself the same thing ever since I found out. How had I missed the signs? How had I let this happen? But I knew dwelling on it wouldn't change anything. All we could do now was move forward. As we wrapped up for the day, Lisa looked at me, her expression serious. "Matt, are you ready for what comes next? This is going to get messy." I took a deep breath. I don't know if anyone's ever ready for something like this. But I'm not backing down. They made their choices, and now they have to face the consequences. She nodded, her resolve matching mine. "We'll get through this. Together." Driving home that night, I felt a strange sense of clarity. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had a plan. Emily and Brandon had tried to build their secret life on the foundation of our trust, but that foundation was crumbling, and they were about to face the fallout. The hardest part was still ahead, confronting them both, explaining the situation to the kids, and navigating the chaos of divorce. But with Lisa by my side, I knew I wasn't alone. I walked into the house to find Jake and Olivia waiting in the living room, their faces serious. "Did you talk to Aunt Lisa?" Jake asked. "Yeah," I said, sitting down with them. "We've got a plan. But I need you both to trust me, okay? This is going to take time, but we'll get through it." They nodded, and for a moment, I saw the same determination in their faces that I felt in my own heart. This wasn't just my fight, it was our family's fight. And we weren't going to let Emily and Brandon destroy what we had built. Lisa and I decided it was time to confront Brandon directly. The more we dug into his finances and actions, the clearer it became that he had been leading this double life for far longer than either of us had realized. It wasn't just about Emily, it was about control, manipulation, and betrayal on a scale that neither of us had fully grasped. We chose neutral ground for the confrontation, Lisa's lawyer's office. This wasn't going to be a screaming match in a living room or a messy argument in public. We wanted structure, clarity, and no chance for Brandon to twist the narrative. Lisa's lawyer agreed to mediate, ensuring that things stayed on track. When Brandon arrived, he looked smug, as if he thought this was just another bump in the road he could talk his way out of. He greeted Lisa with a casual, "Hey, babe," like nothing had happened, and when he saw me, his grin faltered slightly but quickly returned. "Matt," he said, nodding. "Didn't expect to see you here. What's going on?" Lisa didn't waste any time. "Sit down, Brandon," she said, her voice icy. He raised an eyebrow, clearly caught off guard by her tone, but he complied, taking a seat across from us at the large conference table. Lisa's lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Karen, sat at the head of the table, her presence alone radiating authority. Lisa started. "We know everything, Brandon. About you and Emily. About the apartment. About the money you've been stealing from our accounts. So don't waste my time trying to deny it." Brandon blinked, his face paling slightly. "What are you talking about?" Karen slid a folder across the table. "This is what she's talking about," she said calmly. Brandon opened the folder and froze. Inside were screenshots of texts between him and Emily, photos from the apartment, and detailed financial statements showing the money he'd funneled into his secret life. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, he looked like he might try to deny it. But the evidence was overwhelming. "This is ridiculous," he said finally, his voice shaky. "You've been spying on me. That's a violation of my privacy." Karen leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "You're in no position to lecture anyone about violations, Mr. Miller. The evidence speaks for itself. You've been committing financial misconduct, infidelity, and outright theft from your marital assets. Lisa has every right to take legal action against you, and trust me, she will." Brandon looked at Lisa, his expression shifting from defiance to desperation. "Lisa, come on. We can talk about this, can't we? I messed up, okay? But you're blowing this way out of proportion." Lisa's laugh was bitter and sharp. "Out of proportion? You think this is just a mess up? You've been cheating on me with my brother's wife, stealing from me, and lying to my face for who knows how long. This isn't a mistake, Brandon. This is a choice you made over and over again." He tried to reach for her hand across the table, but she pulled back as if his touch physically repulsed her. "It's over," she said, her voice steady. "I'm filing for divorce, and I'll make sure you walk away with as little as possible." Brandon's eyes darted to me, a mix of anger and embarrassment flashing across his face. "You had to get involved, didn't you, Matt? Couldn't just stay out of it?" I leaned forward, meeting his gaze head-on. "You made it my business the second you decided to betray my sister and my wife. So don't play the victim here. You brought this on yourself. He looked like he wanted to say something, but Karen cut him off. Mr. Miller, I suggest you focus on what comes next. You'll be receiving the official paperwork soon, and I advise you to cooperate. Any further misconduct on your part will only make things worse for you. Brandon slumped back in his chair, defeated. Fine, he muttered. You want a divorce? You'll get your damn divorce. Lisa stood, her expression resolute. Good. And don't think for a second that you'll get away with what you've done. I'll make sure of that. She walked out of the room, her head held high. I followed her, glancing back at Brandon one last time. He looked smaller somehow, like the weight of his actions had finally caught up with him. Outside the office, Lisa let out a shaky breath, her composure cracking slightly. That felt final, she said, her voice trembling. It is final, I said gently. And you handled it perfectly. She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. Thanks for being there, Matt. I don't think I could have done that alone. You don't have to do any of this alone, I said firmly. We're in this together. As we drove home, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of victory. Brandon's world was beginning to unravel, and while the fight was far from over, we were taking the first steps toward reclaiming our lives. After the showdown with Brandon, it was time to confront Emily. I had been avoiding this moment, hoping for some clarity on how to approach her, but the confrontation was inevitable. The evidence I'd gathered was overwhelming, and now, with Lisa and I working together, there was no way Emily could talk her way out of it. I chose a quiet evening at home for the conversation. The kids were at a friend's house for a sleepover, giving us the privacy I needed to finally lay everything out. Emily was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, blissfully unaware of what was about to happen. Emily, I said, standing in the doorway of the living room. My voice was calm, but the weight behind it made her look up immediately. What's up? She asked, her tone casual. I walked over and sat in the chair across from her, setting my phone on the coffee table between us. We need to talk. She frowned, her body stiffening slightly. About what? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. About you. And Brandon. Her eyes widened, and for a split second, I saw the fear flash across her face. But she quickly masked it, her expression shifting to confusion. What are you talking about? I unlocked my phone and opened the folder of evidence. I slid it across the table so she could see the screen. The first thing she saw was a photo of her and Brandon at the apartment. Her face drained of color. Where did you get that? She stammered. It doesn't matter where I got it, I said firmly. What matters is that I know. I know about the apartment. I know about the money. I know about everything. She sat back, her hands trembling as she placed her phone on the couch beside her. Matt, I can explain. I raised a hand, cutting her off. Don't insult me by trying to explain this away. There's nothing you can say to make this better, Emily. You've been lying to me for months, maybe longer. You've been sneaking around with Brandon, betraying me, betraying Lisa, and tearing apart two families in the process. And for what? Tears welled up in her eyes as she shook her head. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh even to my own ears. That's the excuse. It just happened. Do you think I'm stupid? Affairs don't just happen, Emily. You made choices, deliberate, calculated choices to betray me and everyone who trusted you. I was lonely, she whispered, her voice breaking. You're always at work, Matt. You're always tired. I didn't feel seen, and Brandon, he made me feel. Don't you dare, I interrupted, my voice sharp. Don't you dare blame this on me. I was working to support our family. I was there for you, for the kids, for us. If you felt lonely, you could have come to me. You could have talked to me. Instead, you chose to destroy everything we built together. She broke down, sobbing into her hands, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Not this time. Do you have any idea what you've done? I continued, my voice shaking. Jake and Olivia are already suspicious. They've seen you sneaking around. They've tracked your location to that damn apartment. Do you know how much this is going to hurt them when they find out the truth? How much it's already hurting them? Her head shot up, her eyes wide with panic. The kids, they don't know, do they? They don't know everything, I said. But they know enough to know something's wrong. And it's your fault. Emily covered her mouth, her sobs muffled. I never wanted to hurt them, she choked out. Well, you did, I said coldly. You hurt them, you hurt me, and you hurt Lisa. And now, you're going to face the consequences. What does that mean? She asked, her voice trembling. It means I've talked to a lawyer, I said bluntly. We have a prenuptial agreement, Emily. You signed it, and it's clear about what happens in the case of infidelity. You'll get 20% of our assets, nothing more. I'm filing for divorce. She stared at me, her tears falling freely now. Matt, please. Don't do this. We can fix this. I'll go to therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. Just, don't end us like this. I shook my head, my heart heavy but resolute. There's nothing left to fix, Emily. You destroyed it. And I'm done. For the first time, she seemed to realize the gravity of the situation. Her sobs quieted, and she sat there in stunned silence as I got up from the chair. You can stay here tonight, I said, heading toward the stairs. But tomorrow, I want you out of this house. I'll be speaking to my lawyer about the next steps, and I suggest you do the same. I didn't wait for her response. I went upstairs, closing the door behind me, and sat on the edge of the bed, my hands shaking. The confrontation had been brutal, but it was necessary. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of relief. The truth was out, and there was no going back. Emily's tears echoed faintly through the walls, but I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. She had made her choices, and now she would have to live with them. The next morning, I woke up feeling hollow. The house was eerily quiet, Emily was gone, and I knew she wasn't coming back anytime soon. She'd left early, probably to avoid another confrontation, leaving behind a hastily written note saying she needed time to think. I crumpled it up and tossed it into the trash. Time to think wasn't going to fix what she had done. But there was one thing I couldn't avoid any longer, Jake and Olivia. They were too smart, too observant to keep in the dark much longer. They deserved the truth, at least as much of it as they could handle. That afternoon, I sat them down in the living room. Olivia curled up on the couch, holding one of her stuffed animals tightly, while Jake sat on the edge, his arms crossed, looking like he already knew what was coming. Dad, Jake said, breaking the silence, is this about Mom? I nodded, my throat tightening. Yeah. It is. Olivia's eyes filled with worry. What's going on? Is she okay? I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. Your mom hasn't been honest with us. She's been spending time with someone else, someone she shouldn't be. And it's hurt our family a lot. Jake's expression hardened, his jaw clenching. You mean Uncle Brandon, he said flatly. Olivia's head whipped toward Jake. What? Uncle Brandon? Jake glanced at her, then back at me. We're not stupid, Dad. I saw the messages on her phone, and we've been tracking her. We knew something was up. I just didn't want to believe it. My heart broke hearing those words. I'm so sorry you had to go through that, Jake. And I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I was trying to protect you both, but I realize now that you already knew more than I thought. Olivia's lip quivered. Mom, and Uncle Brandon. Why would she do that? Doesn't she love us? She does love you, I said quickly. What she did has nothing to do with how much she loves you. She made some bad choices, and now we're all dealing with the consequences. But none of this is your fault. Do you hear me? None of it. Olivia nodded slowly, but her tears were already falling. Jake, on the other hand, looked like he was barely holding it together. So what happens now? Jake asked, his voice tight. Your mom and we're not staying together, I said, the words heavier than I expected. We're getting a divorce. Olivia let out a small gasp, and Jake just nodded, his face set in a grim expression. Will we still see her? Olivia asked, her voice trembling. Yes, I assured her. Your mom will still be a part of your lives. She loves you both, and nothing will change that. But things are going to look different from now on. And I promise I'll do everything I can to make this as easy as possible for you. Jake's fists tightened, and he stood up abruptly, pacing the room. I just don't get it, he said, his voice rising. Why would she do this? Why would she ruin everything? I wanted to give him an answer, but the truth was, I didn't have one. I don't know, Jake. Sometimes people make selfish choices without thinking about how it'll hurt the people they care about. But what matters now is moving forward and taking care of each other. Jake stopped pacing and turned to me, his eyes blazing. She doesn't deserve that apartment. She doesn't deserve to get away with this. She won't, I said firmly. Your Aunt Lisa and I are handling it. We've been working with lawyers to make sure that your mom and Uncle Brandon face the consequences of their choices. But I don't want you to worry about that. Let me handle it. He nodded reluctantly, sitting back down next to Olivia and putting an arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him, still clutching her stuffed animal. I know this is hard, I said, my voice softening. But we're going to get through it. The three of us, we're still a family. And I promise, no matter what happens, I'll always be here for you. They both nodded, and for the first time in what felt like weeks, I saw a glimmer of hope in their eyes. We weren't okay, not yet, but we were on our way. Later that night, after they'd gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the empty space where Emily used to sit. The house felt different now, quieter, heavier, but also clearer, like the fog of lies and betrayal had finally lifted. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. The road ahead was still long, but at least now I wasn't walking it alone. The days that followed were a whirlwind of paperwork, meetings with lawyers, and tough conversations. Lisa and I had both decided to take swift legal action, her against Brandon and me against Emily. There was no room for hesitation anymore. The evidence we'd gathered was airtight, and we were ready to use it to protect what mattered most, our kids and our future. I met with my lawyer, a sharp, meticulous man named Grant, who immediately saw the strength of my case. You're in a good position, Matt, he said as we reviewed the prenuptial agreement. The infidelity clause is clear. Emily's entitled to 20% of your shared assets, and with the evidence you've provided, she won't be able to contest that. The courts won't look kindly on her behavior, especially with the financial misconduct on top of the affair. It was a relief to hear, but it didn't erase the sting of betrayal. Dividing up a life I thought was solid and permanent wasn't something I'd ever prepared for. Emily's lawyer sent her initial response to Grant a few days later. Unsurprisingly, she wanted to contest the prenup. Her argument was that she had contributed significantly to our family, both as a mother and a partner, and deserved more. But the evidence of her affair and the financial records were working against her. Grant reassured me. She can argue all she wants, but her actions have consequences. The court will see that you're the one who's been acting in the best interest of the family. Meanwhile, Lisa's battle with Brandon was heating up. Her lawyer, Karen, had filed for divorce and submitted evidence of Brandon's financial misconduct and infidelity. The charges on his secret credit card, the apartment lease, and even the gifts he'd bought Emily were all documented. Brandon, unsurprisingly, was fighting back, trying to shift the blame and paint himself as a victim. Lisa and I met frequently during this time, comparing notes and keeping each other updated. One afternoon, as we sat in her kitchen surrounded by legal documents, she looked up at me with a tired smile. "Can you believe we're here?" she asked. "Fighting these battles, picking up the pieces of their mess." I shook my head, my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. "No. But I can believe we're stronger than they thought. They underestimated us." She nodded, her smile fading. "I just hate what this is doing to the kids. They don't deserve any of this." "None of us do," I said. "But we'll get through it. We'll make sure they come out of this okay." We were both trying to stay strong, but it wasn't easy. Every day brought new challenges. Emily and Brandon were growing increasingly defensive as the cases progressed. Emily, in particular, had started sending me long, emotional texts, begging me to reconsider the divorce and allow her a chance to redeem herself. "I made a mistake," she wrote one night. "But I love you, Matt. I love our family. Please don't take that away from me." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Her actions had already taken everything away, and no amount of apologies could undo that. One of the hardest parts of the process was deciding what to tell the kids about the legal proceedings. Jake, being older, understood more than Olivia, but both of them were struggling with the changes in our lives. "Is Mom in trouble?" Olivia asked me one evening as I tucked her into bed. "Not trouble, sweetie," I said gently. "But we're trying to figure out how to make things right for everyone." She nodded, her eyes heavy with sleep. "I just want us to be happy again." Her words stayed with me long after she drifted off. That was all I wanted too, for my kids to be happy, for us to rebuild some semblance of peace. The legal battles were exhausting, but Lisa and I kept pushing forward. We leaned on each other during the tough moments, finding strength in our shared determination to protect our families. One night, after a particularly draining day of meetings and paperwork, Lisa looked at me and said, "You know, we're doing this not just for us but for them. For Jake, Olivia, and even their kids one day. We're setting the example that you don't let people walk all over you. You stand up for what's right." She was right. As hard as it was, this fight wasn't just about the past, it was about the future. Emily and Brandon had underestimated the strength of the people they betrayed. But we were proving, day by day, that they couldn't break us. The legal battles dragged on for months, but in the end, justice prevailed. Emily and Brandon had underestimated not only Lisa and me but the strength of the truth and the clarity of the evidence we had painstakingly gathered. By the time the dust settled, their worlds were in shambles. The court upheld the prenuptial agreement. Emily was awarded her 20% of the marital assets, a fraction of what she had hoped for. She had fought hard, painting herself as a victim of neglect and loneliness, but the evidence of her affair and financial misconduct spoke louder than her words. The court wasn't swayed by her pleas, and neither was I. Lisa's case against Brandon was equally decisive. The financial records Karen had unearthed left no room for Brandon to maneuver. The apartment lease, the secret credit card, the money he'd funneled into his double life, it was all there, irrefutable and damning. The court ruled in Lisa's favor, granting her primary custody of their 2 kids and the majority of their shared assets. Brandon, defeated and humiliated, was left scrambling to rebuild his life. Emily and Brandon both relocated to New Orleans shortly after the rulings. I heard through the grapevine that they were trying to start over together, but the fallout from their actions followed them. Friends and extended family had caught wind of the affair, and their reputations were tarnished. They became pariahs, shadows of the people they once were. For Lisa and me, the aftermath was both a relief and a challenge. The legal battles were over, but the emotional scars remained. We leaned on each other, finding strength in our shared experience and determination to move forward. The kids struggled at first. Jake was angry, his trust in his mother shattered, while Olivia had bouts of sadness, missing the family dynamic we'd once had. But over time, they began to heal. I made it my mission to be there for them, to show them that while life had changed, we were still a family. Lisa and I grew closer than ever. We became an unshakable team, supporting each other through the hard days and celebrating the small victories, Jake's soccer games, Olivia's art shows, quiet family dinners where laughter slowly began to return. One night, months after the court rulings, Lisa and I sat on her back porch, sipping coffee as the sun set. The air was cool, and the weight we'd carried for so long felt lighter. "Do you ever think about them?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Not in a longing way, though. More like a lesson. A reminder of what not to accept in life." She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "Same here. I think about how far we've come, and I'm proud of us." "Me too," I said, meaning it. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours again. The chaos Emily and Brandon had caused no longer controlled us. We had taken back our power, rebuilt our families, and found peace in the aftermath of betrayal. As I sat there with Lisa, watching the last rays of sunlight dip below the horizon, I realized something: the people who had betrayed us thought they were destroying us. But in the end, they'd only made us stronger.